The Brandon Peters Show may contain explicit language and detailed plot points. For more information on the show, stay tuned to the end of the episode. And now, here's Brandon.
Greetings, brothers and sisters of the Dark Lord. This is the Brandon Peters Show, back with another segment of Products of the Panic. And of course, that means I have brought out my warehouse manufactured retail store bought Parker Brothers Ouija board and summoned up the Saturday Evening Post, Troy Brownfield.
Thank you, Brandon. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm terrific. I'm very excited to get back into this. For those of you who may have missed the first one, this is the second one. I'm not going to explain these every time, but this is the product of the panic, reflecting on things that happened during the satanic panic era of the 1980s. We recently went through a church-made heavy metal is the devil, y'all, or no, basically pop music is the devil. Misbehaving's the only song allowed to be around. And we went through that back in November. We took a little break. We gave Jesus his time in December, and then my time in January, but we're here in February to kick off some fire. And this is not always going to be about movies or documentaries. There are going to be other little topics and thingies. I don't know. We're talking about a news story from 60 Minutes today. This is the famous 60 Minutes with Ed Bradley covering Dungeons and Dragons and the dangers of for your kids from 1985. Troy, I was alive. I was 3 years old when this aired, but were you like aware of this story as it happened, or was it like a looking back or how'd it go for you?
I was aware. It's funny because you talk to people who were teens at the time, and some people have radically different perspectives on it. And part of it depends on where you live, that you maybe didn't experience it at all. And sometimes you experienced a lot of it. And I feel like living in Indiana, experienced a fair deal of it. But then I was naturally interested when this stuff would show up on TV. Mm-hmm. And 60 Minutes was, right after football. So you would sometimes catch the top 4 stories are going to be this. And there was a lot of discussion around the fact that the D&D story was happening. It was a thing that was promoted and a thing that was talked about. 60 Minutes is digging into it because they, and still are in many ways, their program's over 50 years old. They're held up as a archetype of investigative reporting and sometimes confrontational reporting. The famous SNL sketch with Martin Short as the nervous lawyer is a 60 Minutes sketch. They're famous for putting people on the griddle and talking to corrupt people and everything. So it seems 60 Minutes is your go-to if you want to expose something radically evil in the mid 80s. The thing, of course, is they're not actually exposing the thing that's radically evil.
Right.
So it becomes this kind of artifact. I mean, you and I were talking ahead of the program. Ed Bradley was one of the big 3, 4. You had your Morally Safe, your Mike Wallace, your Ed Bradley, really big names associated with the show. But for viewers that might not know, Bradley was a legendary journalist. He shot more than 500 segments for 60 Minutes. Cat won 19 Emmys, Peabody Award. He's the first Black reporter to cover the White House. He was at the fall of Saigon, and he wasn't totally unhip. He was the first male correspondent to wear a visible earring on air. He's big into jazz. When he died, they had a giant jazz parade in New Orleans for him. I mean, so there's a lot of cool stuff about Ed Bradley.
But this
He's
is not
bona
one of
fide.
them.
This is not. It's just really unfortunate that this is the thing that people will see and they'll think of Ed Bradley.
Like, I can think of this report a lot, but whenever I go back to it, I'm like, oh yeah, it was Ed Bradley who did this. Like, it doesn't go together. It's a square peg in a circular peg hole or whatever. But yeah.
Yeah, if it happened on 60 Minutes today, you would be just as mystified if Anderson Cooper was the guy doing
the
segment.
Because
it just it does it. I remember seeing the thing and whatnot, but then it doesn't square with my memory of Bradley at all.
No, it doesn't.
So,
but he's all in here. Like, it's strange. It's like I don't like, stop it, Ed Bradley. I believe you're better than this.
And I have a theory on this, and kind of a double-sided theory. Number one, Bradley was not a parent. In fact, he never had kids, but I kind of feel like they interviewed Patricia Pulling first. And here's a woman who, recently lost her son. It's only been a couple of years at this point. It's still, her grief is obviously still a raw nerve that she's got a mission. And I really do believe that colored the perception of the rest of how the report was conducted.
Gotcha.
And I think that's unfortunate.
Do you think the according to what I've looked up, and I'm not going to claim master researcher here on this, but the credited reporter for this is Morley Safer. So I don't know anything about like what his agenda could be.
No.
Or
Morley Safer's, in the context of now, I think of him as an old guy. And I don't say that as a knock or ageist or whatever, but there really is a breaking point when certain people just don't understand the thing they're talking about.
Right.
And when you have, on one hand, a grief-stricken mother, and on the other hand, a bunch of kids saying, no, we're really fine, who is the older journalist going to lean toward in that situation, even though you're trying to maintain objectivity and have the best of journalistic intentions? It feels like maybe something happened.
Yeah, maybe like this could be a kind of the equivalent of like Mark Zuckerberg with all the old white politician men, like, what, the Facebook does what now say my WhatsApp does that, like kind of the equivalent of, they don't know what they're talking about, but they want to somehow control the narrative or the conversation here journalistically.
And there's another element in the mix, a spoiler that's got his own problems, which is Thomas Radecki, who was already known for founding the National Coalition on Television Violence,
right?
And was a big cultural critic. But I'll save the surprise for later.
Okay, so like my thing is too, like, did somebody with deep pockets, whether it be some sort of Christian coalition, the BAD or whatever, or is that what it was called, BAD?
Yeah, that was Pulling's group.
Or the TV violence guy, like, did somebody coerce somebody at 60 Minutes to run a story like this? Like, that's, I don't know.
It's interesting in the context of all the news programs in the 80s, because I can't think of a single one that took up for role-playing games. Not even to, hilariously play the devil's advocate.
Right.
Nobody really stepped up and said, it's just a game, man.
Yeah.
There wasn't a cultural force that you would have now. If this sort of thing happened now, which, things being as they are, could very easily happen, you're going to have a variety of actors and musicians and filmmakers and novelists that will take up for this as an imagination building, teamwork building, fundamental exercise of imagination. It's
Right.
They're going to be there. You're going to have a lot of people that are in the corner of it, and then there weren't. If you think about it, same rough period of time, the PMRC inspired hearings about the record industry on Capitol Hill, 3 people showed up.
Right.
Yeah, Dee Snider, Frank Zappa, and John Denver. And nobody showed up for Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
That's
right. And Dungeons and Dragons at this point, how old was it exactly?
Guy Gax and Dave Arneson created it in 1974. In 1977, they did the rule split, which was designed to make it more accessible to younger players. So you had the AD&D and the basic set. And AD&D, went to the
props for the YouTube
hardback books.
Mm-hmm.
These are from 1977 to 1979. They did these in the player's manual. So AD&D was coming out of this, and they made a basic box set for the younglings. And then they revised the basic set in 1981. But there's a few things going on culturally that kind of helped it blow up. And one of them was the fact that in the late 1970s, you had this boom in science fiction and fantasy.
Right.
Started with Star Wars, goes into
Conan and
Hawk the Slayer episode with talk about the sword and sorcery boom of the 1980s.
Right.
I wrote about it for the Post. So that's going on. You have the proliferation of malls in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of these malls had a Beat Alt and the Walden Books or some kind of gaming store in them that kids in, freaking Iowa could go to the mall. And if they had a Walden Books, they could get D&D stuff. It used to be, very special to gaming stores, and the reach was not as profound. And by the time you have places you can actually go and buy it, you're talking 3 and 4 million people are playing it. And it doesn't hurt that the kids are playing D&D and ET.
Yeah.
So this is 1982. So it's squarely in,
That's
oh
true.
my God, this game looks awesome. Where can I get it? The mall? And so all of these things kind of stack.
Troy, those kids claim to seen an alien.
Yeah, well,
okay,
drugs.
so look what it did to them.
Yeah, that was drugs.
Is that the advanced part of Dungeons and Dragons? Aliens?
I thought you were saying the drugs.
Yeah, they're both. Yeah, and so this story is also, it's coming out 3 years after Mazes and Monsters, which was in, you can go back to my old show called Cinema Cavalcade and hear all about that, which I think we have dropped that before. And that was based off James Dallas Egbert III, which they don't mention at all here in this story. And so it's almost like, well, that movie didn't work, so let's try a factual hit news piece or something, kind of. But this story focuses on just slightly dropping about murders and suicides, interviewing upset parents, and grilling the Dungeons and Dragons, one of the co-creators, and I think the CEO they have with them?
Yeah.
But they never grill the parents to anything else. Like, they always ask the Dungeons and Dragons guys, like, it's this, but they never ask the parents, do you think perhaps this? So it's this definitely slanted piece that's like, your kids may be doing it and you don't even know. And it's, yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Brandon.
No, that's it. I mean, they show kids playing it, and it looks like they're in these, like, kind of not really hidden rooms, but like where no one else is, and they have kids explaining the game to them. They do get some kid opinions about Dungeons and Dragons throughout to make it kind of look like is, but it's more in a like, oh, those poor innocent kids that just don't know type thing. But they do call them
Yeah.
highly imaginative and intelligent kids. And there's no board, only dice. I do like that they were talking about the game. They give Ed Bradley gives his overview, and then he talks about the type of characters in it, and he sandwiches in gods and devils into the character mix. Which when I think of Dungeons and Dragons, I'm like, sure, that's part of it, but I don't, that's not the big sell of characters. Like there's like, dragons and barbarians and wizards and gods and devils and harpies and blah, like that's kind of how he slips it in. I'm like, they had to list gods and devils to get the church people's attention right there. Because if you hear of fiction using gods and devils, then it's bad fiction. That's what I would assume, trying to get on their side with that.
Yeah, what's kind of funny is, and I'm just going to the monster manual here, you had a devil section with, Asmodeus and Beelzebub and whatnot. But hilariously and alphabetically, kind of like right after that, they have just as many pages with dinosaurs as potential monsters with stats. Right. And then, they do have, the kind of the weird classes and the Lovecraft inspired. So it's not just that. Now they did have the my background there's from the Deities and Demigods handbook. So they did a whole handbook on that. But they're also doing handbooks on multiple things because some people are into this part, some people are into this part. And the Deities and Demigods was really a way to position it closer to mythology. It's got a lot of mythological characters in it.
Right.
But the original version also included Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos. And after that original version, Chaosium did the Call of Cthulhu game and wrapped them up in a trademark associated with the game. So TSR's never reprinted the Lovecraft pantheon.
Okay.
So you did have these kind of, gods and devils, but it was only if you chose to emphasize that part. If you wanted the Tolkien-esque trolls and evil wizards and everything, you got that. If you wanted, werewolf style campaign, you got that. They didn't go more into the horror thing until like the Ravenloft stuff.
Yeah, Ravenloft. That was my cup. I love that stuff. The vampires and stuff. It's hard though. That's whenever.
But yeah, it's kind of telling when they talk to Patricia Pulling there. She's like, my son had no problems and whatever. And when I hear that, it just sounds like an alarm because every kid's got problems. And that just sounds like you're in really super huge denial that, and the Egbert case, when we talked about that with respect to mazes and monsters, that kid had a lot of issues and had a lot of therapy and, dealing with issues of sexuality and so forth, that he was grappling with these things he wasn't talking to his parents about and was prone to disappearing. He had disappeared more than once prior to the Mazes and Monsters disappearance.
Right. So
I
want to go back to Irving Lee Bink Pulling, his mother is a prime focus of this article or this piece. Her name was Pat, I believe.
Pat Pulling, yeah.
So according to this, they say he was 16 years old. It was suicide. He shot himself on June 9th of 1982, quote unquote, hours after a D&D curse was placed on him during a game conducted at his local high school. So in the Bad's primer, Pulling reprints 14 of 20 column inches of a August 83 story concerning the Pulling's lawsuit against the school where the game was played against TSR. The article notes that Bink Pulling had trouble fitting in and became dejected when he was unable to find a campaign manager when he ran for school office. Shortly before his death, he wrote, "Life is a joke" on the blackboard in one of his classes, one classmate said. In the section of the article Pulling did not print, the following appeared. "He had a lot of problems anyway that weren't associated with the game," said Victoria Rockacharlie, another classmate of Pulling's in the talented and gifted program. Though she presents herself as taken utterly unaware by her son's death, at least in bad publications, Mrs. Pulling was aware of her son's problems. During a seminar given at the North Colorado South Wyoming Detective Association in September of '86, she said her son had been displaying lycanthropic tendencies, like running around the backyard barking. Within the month before his death, 19 rabbits Bink had raised were inexplicably torn apart, and a cat was found disemboweled with a knife. So it seems very clear he was a disturbed youth beyond Dungeons and Dragons.
Right.
Like,
and yeah.
And I believe it's his sister that they ask in this. Like, they're like, tell him what he said. Tell him what he said. And she's like crying and says, that like he said that he would kill me if I told them he was playing Dungeons and Dragons, like his parents. I'm like, obviously you had a fucked up kid and you took the thing he liked from him.
Yeah.
And then we're going to punish him if he played it. That's like that could have happened if it was a video game or a model collection or something like.
Yeah. And it's interesting when you mentioned that was at a private investigators conference.
Mm-hmm.
Later in the 80s, Pulling gets herself a private investigator's license and begins consulting with police departments on, wait for it, what kind of cases, Brandon? What kind of cases?
God. Dungeons and Dragons, yeah.
Well, not just Dungeons and Dragons, but satanic.
Cases. Oh, possession.
Yeah.
Occult.
So, and I got to read this because this is great. As the popularity of D&D and other role-playing games increased, Pulling's views and statements were increasingly called into question. She actually co-wrote a book called The Devil's Web, Who is Stalking Your Children for Satan.
Oh, Jesus.
Published in '89. So Pulling once told a newspaper reporter that 8% of the people living in Richmond, Virginia were Satanists. She had arrived at that figure, she explained, by estimating that 4% of adults and 4% of teenagers were involved with Satanism, and added those to get 8%. When the reporter informed her that was still 4%, not 8%, she claimed it didn't matter because even 8% was a conservative figure. That appeared in the Richmond News Leader in 1989.
All the people are saying, everybody's talking about.
All the people are saying 8%, maybe 16%.
If you could see all this evidence. Yeah, like there's a lot of stretching. Like they name these kids, and we're going to talk about them because I want to talk about what they say and what was true, just like I did with Mr. Bink here. They name drop about 5 kids, and they go, and the list goes on. And I'm like, does it? Because I looked at cases associated with Dungeons and Dragons, and there are a total of like 12 with potential. 12. That's not a list going on and on and on. And mind you, at this time the story is happening, they claim between 3 and 4 million kids are actively playing Dungeons and Dragons.
All right, and that's based on sales data.
I don't know when I tell you what a percent 12 is of that, but you probably want a case of the Dungeons and Dragons than you would COVID. You probably would want a case of D&D fever more than you want COVID. But like, and they are pushing it on the guys from Dungeons and Dragons who are like, guys, like this is ridiculous. No, like they're like, well, like, you know, people play Monopoly, they don't go blaming bankruptcy. You know, I mean, like, and Ed Bradley's like, that is not the same. That is not, it's like, are you joking here? It's like, what are you fucking bringing to me, man? Like it's like all these kids died and they found out they all had Cinnamon Toast Crunch in their pantry. Like, it's stretching. Like, it's as unscientific as you can get, this whole thing.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of interesting issues tied up with it. There's certainly a level of parental guilt, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Any parent is going to feel guilt when
Oh,
the
and the
child
Dungeons and
dies.
Dragons guys throw that out there, like,
Yeah.
ooh.
Yeah, like any parent's going to feel guilt, but the 80s are famous for unengaged parenting.
Mm-hmm.
You know, all the memes and so forth about Gen X being latchkey kids and everything, that's all some true shit. And it goes back to the workforce had changed. There was an expectation that both parents worked. There's a lot of, you know, especially in the cities, you've got a lot of office related jobs. It's upward mobility. People are expecting longer hours. Kids are often fending for themselves and whatnot. And if something goes wrong, it's not my fault because I was at a job and not seeing my kid for 60 hours a week. It's your fault.
Yeah, they gotta
And
find a blame. They have to have an answer for something that they don't have an answer for, or it's them.
yeah.
You know,
And
like if you got a mentally troubled kid, you're probably not going to have the answers for it. I'm sorry. It might not even be your fault. It's just that's things. It's tough. Like, but
yeah.
they want a reason. And that comes from like a lot of like religion promises a reason for everything, and there isn't a reason for everything in life. And that's where in a strong church going decade of people and being led by and sold and promoted with a ton of like large faith-based stuff, Christianity wise, they think there's a reason for everything or an answer. And then this is, I guess, for 12 people, this is it. Like,
well, yeah. There's also an interesting either or with everything that's associated with the satanic panic, right? Mm-hmm. If you think of, you know, horror novels and movies, if you think of role-playing games, if you think of metal and all of this stuff, it's all the siren song of the outsider. People who don't feel like they fit in have always been drawn to that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
The music may shift from decade to decade. It may go from punk to metal to gothy stuff to alternative, whatever. But outsider kids always go to outsider music and outsider entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's a uniform or anything that goes with it, it makes them more obvious of a target. And it makes the stuff that they're into more obvious. The stuff didn't change your kid. Your kid found something that appealed to them or that they fit in. And now you attack that rather than the cause of why your kid is removed, disturbed, upset, depressed, whatever. And, you know, particularly it was funny in the 80s, the parents were all in therapy, but nobody wanted to put the kids in therapy. The kids just need to snap out of it.
Right. Yeah. So one of our other victims who dropped, Timothy Grice, who is 21. That's a full-on adult. But he's here with the kids. He committed suicide by shotgun. The report on this says the detective notes D&D became a reality. Well, that's not the full quote from the detective. The detective's full quote, not used in this segment, was D&D became a reality. He thought he was not constrained to this life, but could leave and return because of the game. Now, his mother penned a note during with association with all this, and she said, "There's been a great deal of publicity nationwide attributing the death of my son, Tim Grice, to the influence of Dungeons and Dragons. Nothing could be further from the truth, and I have steadfastly maintained so to the press who have contacted me. Dungeons and Dragons gave him many hours of pleasure. It was a delight to watch he and his friends play. It would not have been his intent in any way to have his death reflect negatively upon you, your company, or your outlets, or your creative outlets for others."
That's perfect.
Yeah.
Your cat. That's as perfect as an assessment as you can really think of. And I don't mean I'm not trying to be glib or funny or anything about the suicide. Is horrible. It's awful whenever anyone feels driven to do this. But I can't help but notice that no one kills themselves in a D&D like fashion.
No, it's
like you shot yourself in the chest, you killed yourself with a shotgun. Nobody's setting up a guillotine. Nobody's killing themselves with a battle axe. Nobody's running themselves through with the sword they bought at a convention.
Jumping into the pit of despair. Like, no, it's good old fashioned American steel. Bam. Yeah.
And it's horrible, but that would be the first thing you would look at. You look at that kind of stuff when you're trying to establish motive. We're trying to establish if the same killer did it. Stabbing is personal. It's the same shoe print, whatever, kind of things. There's no causality in it at all. There's no.
This super creative outlet has the most uncreative conventional suicides. And I'm not trying to belittle. I'm trying to play this as looking at this situation as a case or something like that. But they're not killing themselves they're just offing themselves, and they happen to play Dungeons and Dragons. Like, that's even crazier. This other one, that Daniel and Steve and Irwin, they were 16 and 12 years old. It was a murder-suicide. The police said that they were obsessed with the game. Bad blamed D&D. This is when where Bad got involved. The kids had actually, in real life, they had a death pact. And the family denied anything to do with the D&D. So 2 young brothers carried out a murder-suicide pact last fall because the older brother feared his sentencing in an auto theft case, not because of the D&D fantasy game. Their mother said. The article went on to quote Daniel's suicide note, said, "Dear Mom and Dad, I am sorry that it had to end this way, but things just came to a close. A man without his freedom is not a man at all. Therefore, this man is targeted for termination, and my goodbyes are now. So shall it be, love, Dan." Right there. It was never D&D from the start of this, but somehow police and Bad twist it to D&D when clearly this guy didn't want to go to jail.
Yeah.
Like, it's insanity.
Yeah, it's that's I think a through line with the Satanic Panic. This certainly goes back to the video on music we watched previously, and all of the books that you would find, like Maury Terry's The Ultimate Evil and so forth. They are, and even going all the way back to the 50s with, Rhythm Seduction of the Innocent. They are completely without citation. They don't provide evidence. They don't back anything up. They don't have real experts quoting on something. Everything's conjecture. And if it's not conjecture that leads to the conclusion that you wanted, it's discarded. Anybody that disagrees is, their collaborator.
Right.
And which Thomas Radecki, who the National Council on Television Violence guy.
Looks like a real cool guy. Real cool guy.
He's currently in prison. Do you know this, Brandon?
Tell it. Not sure I do.
Okay, so for years he misrepresented his medical status. He did have a medical license, but he claimed to be on the University of Illinois College of Medicine. Now, he was a clinician. He was allowed to practice, but he was not on the faculty, which is a big, huge distinction when you're in that field. That even caused him to have, in 92, the Illinois Department of Professional Regulation revoked his medical license for 5 years because of this crap and also engaging in immoral conduct with patients.
Oh.
And there was some harassment stuff. He resigned from the TV council. He started a surrogate parenting institute, which is a fertility clinic, and he didn't get his medical license back because of claims associated with that. And then, he voluntarily surrendered his medical license in 2012, and I quote, "While facing allegations of unprofessional conduct with patients, these allegations include that Radecki traded drugs to patients for sex." And so he was, these were opioid addiction treatment drugs that he ran in several counties through a program he ran in several counties called Doctors and Lawyers for a Drug-Free Youth. So in 2016, he got sentenced to 11 to 22 years, and in 2018, a judge rejected a sentence reduction request.
Oh.
So this guy who spent all the 80s testifying in trials, at one point he introduced a letter into evidence that suggested gaming caused death, and it was a letter that was from Mazes and Monsters, so it was a work of fiction. It wasn't a real letter, but he passed it off as, that he appeared and testified in these cases, which is another thread, like Pat Pulling did, like Michelle Smith from Michelle Remembers, and these people would testify as expert witnesses and made everything worse for everybody.
God.
But yeah, so that guy with his glasses and his like sensitive demeanor, these kids are dying, is out there trading drugs for sex and going to jail.
It always happens. But they need like a Goodfellas Layla montage to these what happened to the faces of the satanic panic, like moral majority agenda stuff. Like that'd be great. Someone can make that, please.
I'm drawing a blank right now, but one, I think it might have been the one that wrote Satan's Underground and Other Recovered Memories, when it was out the same time as Michelle Remembers. I think it was that writer. I'm not saying for certainty, but I think it was her who got busted for it being a fabrication, kind of went away for a while and reinvented herself as a Holocaust survivor.
Yeah, that's what you said. Yeah. I think you said that before. Yeah.
They're awful.
Awful people. Awful. The worst. So, so this another one they mentioned here. I'm gonna keep segue to the people pointed out in this as D&D possessed them and made them do bad things. James Allen Kirby, 14 years old, killed his principal and wounded 3 other people. Police blame D&D. ABC's show 2020, after this, 1986, did a report on this incident, and nowhere in that report is D&D mentioned or referred to. Kirby did not have an easy life. He was an outcast in school and was beaten up every day. His teachers ignored him. His father never gave him any approval, and his mother just babied him. Kirby's psychologist explained the occurrence as Kirby's way of dealing with his father's rejection. And his father's name was not Dungeons nor Dragons. So, again, parenting. Absent parenting, part of the problem. Getting picked on at school, part of the problem, which would, that kind of stuff comes to a head in the 90s with Columbine, that brings up another panic of sorts later on.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking of Columbine while you were talking, about that particular case.
Mm-hmm.
The rush to figure out what happened afterwards, where they were throwing around Manson and Rammstein and everything.
Rammstein, The Matrix.
In a lot of cases, these two guys didn't even listen to the music they were talking about. They weren't fans, but they sure as hell were building bombs in their backyard, taking videotapes of it.
Yeah.
The parents knew that was going on.
Right. It's all fun till it happens. Like on this, if we ever do something panic related with the Columbine stuff, back in high school, I was a prolific high school filmmaker. I was making a movie called Blinded by Rage, and it was going to be for state competition, media fair throughout the nation and stuff like that. So you make a 10-minute film, submit it, blah, blah, blah. So me and my friends, we made like action horror movies, stuff like that. Came up with this action movie where this governor is coming to, and you got to fit it into your age range because that's who you can cast and stuff. But the governor of the state was coming to give a speech at a school, and it gets held hostage. All the terrorist guys take over for the janitors. They dress up like the janitors and stuff, and they hold them hostage. And spoiler, the person who set it up is the police FBI negotiator who was the guy who lost to him in the election because of photos. It's great. It's a great story. It's 10 minutes long. It's awesome.
Love it.
We had we had my friend who was in my production team. His father was a military collector and collected replica weapons, actual uniforms, stuff like that. So we would always have cool looking props for our action sequences. We were shooting this movie in the school. This is fall of '98. We're doing this movie wrap production in January with all this stuff. So we had a hallway shootout scene chasing through stuff. We had these things in the school. We're shooting these scenes. Principal come by, sit to watch a few takes. He's like, I can't wait to see this. This is going to be great. You know, all like, oh, gung ho about it. We released the movie. We showed it in school. Like we had we broadcast it through school. They want us to show it. We went to the regional competition. We set the scoring record for regional competition with Blinded by Rage. No one had ever scored that high. We were in the 90s. No one ever got past 88. And a record that would hold and not be broken until I broke it the next year. But so we go, and the week of the state competition, Columbine happens. This is like my teacher is like, hey, I'm really sorry. Let's skip state. We can't go. I'm like, we're going to state. I'm taking my damn film. I worked so hard on this. He's like, it sucks, but I'm like, I'm going to read a letter beforehand. I'm going to say I don't condone violence or depicts that. It's a coincidence. I don't think what they did. Yeah. I'll write a letter knowing it. Well, I end up placing like 8th there. But also, meanwhile, behind the scenes at school, they're really curious about me. And all of a sudden, so I got a hall pass one day from, my media teacher, he was also an English teacher, and the librarian of the school were my reps. Like he was really, he was a very big mentor to me with making movies and stuff. And I edited stuff for school all the time outside of class. He ended up giving me an independent study award my senior year for a lot of work I did for stuff that we didn't have that existed at our school. And the librarian, she also would rep for the media fair stuff. So I got called to the library, and they had me and my friend I co-directed the movie with. And they're like, look, can the two of you just be on the best behavior of your life till the end of this school year? And we're like, what's going on? Well, they were suspicious of us. They were thinking about suspending us. They were thinking about making us go away. Like and they fought for us to keep us in like all sorts of crazy crap. And he's like, you don't know we're having this conversation, okay? Because we are not supposed to be having this conversation with you. We don't think it's fair to you. We're going against our other staff. But there were some teachers that you wouldn't believe went ballistic about you guys because of that movie you shot. We told them that you guys only believe it's entertainment. There's nothing to think about with you guys. And there was another kid it happened to just because he wore a trench coat. Jesus. And so I was on what we called Columbine watch the rest of the year for just making a movie, which, yeah. But when the principal comes and is like, this is cool. And then it's like, no, yeah, I get that you might want to bring me in and ask me if everything's okay. I'll talk about Columbine, how it related to my video or something, rather than should we kick these kids out of school right now? Like, yeah. But yeah, so that was my junior year of high school. And yeah, it was crazy to know that, but I wasn't supposed to know that. But luckily he told me and stood by me. So
yeah, as someone who's taught at the high school and college levels and adjuncted for schools in addition to being like a full-time staff member and everything, I gotta say, nearly every first move any administration makes in response to something like that is wrong.
Yeah.
It
could be the move that changes my mentality, like kick him out of school, like, why you hate me for being me? And then I go nuts, like.
Yeah, it's shocking how wrong some of these people get it.
Yeah. We couldn't just have a conversation. Bring me in a room with all these teachers. Let's just talk. Like, but no.
Yeah. And that's, I was teaching when the Virginia Tech shooting happened.
Mm-hmm.
And that's on a college campus. It's somebody walking into a classroom.
Yeah.
And man, I taught at a women's college, and my students were freaked out that day because there was no plan.
No.
There's no institutional plan. There was no way. We had a bunch of old buildings. There wasn't any kind of LinkedIn communication network where you could sound an alarm that you would hear everywhere. There was no there's no central hub where you could do a public address, anything like that. There wasn't there was nothing. And a lot of people were freaked out by the notion that this could start and happen in a building and they would have no idea it was going on, no idea to get out. But then, 15 years or so later, I'm teaching high school, and every teacher was required to have an app that had a panic button on it. And, if you hit that panic button, everybody else's panic button was going to go off. It was going to go through, the whole school. In like 2 taps, you could set off an alarm that everybody would know the shit was going down. And
shit, guys, I was trying to order a pizza. Fuck.
But it
Sorry.
took years for people to figure that stuff out.
Yeah.
So these initial reactions, that brings it back to all of this. These initial reactions are often so bad. And honestly, you don't hear much talk about teen suicide today.
Yeah.
It still happens. It's still regular. It's still a problem. It's a leading cause of death, and we just don't talk about it.
Right.
Unless there's something to pin it on.
Yeah, like that's what I'm saying. They have to have a reason. The reason's not there. Everybody is different. No one knows what goes on in people's head. Truly, you want to be able to relate to everything. You cannot relate to everything in life. Like it's a complex world, and they want simple answers.
Yeah, and her name eludes me at the moment. I'm sorry, but the former Miss USA, who was a news correspondent that just jumped to her death over the weekend.
Mm-hmm.
That's a person who ostensibly has everything going for them from the outside. Beautiful, professional, connected, living in a high rise in New York, and jumps to their death. And who the fuck knows what was going on in that poor soul's mind? Right. But you try to rationalize that. You can't rationalize a 14-year-old any better.
Oh, hell no.
That's you're not.
Yeah.
And the bigger thing is, like, at least most adults are in touch with the idea of consequence. Yeah. Yeah. Teenagers are fabulously famous for doing stupid crap.
Well, and the understanding of mortality. Like that's something that doesn't come to you till later. Like the realization of mortality. Like that's, and even then I'm only 40 and I don't even know if I really know, like, there's still more to learn. Every decade of my life, I've been like, oh, well, fuck.
Yep.
If I only knew what I knew then or whatever. And there's all that.
Invest in Apple. Invest in
Apple. There's this, while we're on the suicide, another one, gun suicide, of course. Jeffrey Jacklovich, he was 14. His suicide notes reported to have said, I want to go to the world of elves and fantasy and leave the world of conflict. Because of this note, his death has been linked to D&D. Instead, as the note indicates, his desire to escape the world of conflict. That's what it, had the note read, I want to go be with Jesus and leave the world of conflict. Would Jesus have been blamed? Or would everyone have said Jeffrey was just too frail a spirit to endure the trials and tribulations of this mortal coil?
I think it'd be column B, Alex.
Column B. But yeah, that's another one. Like if you switch it with something else, is it if Dungeons and Dragons was like Disney themed with Mickey and all that stuff, they've gone after it?
Yeah, it's so ironic that all of this stuff is happening at the same time in the 80s, all the things that we've talked about, all the components of the panic. And you mentioned the particular popularity of televangelists and how huge they were. But between the Bakers and Oral Roberts and Jimmy Swaggart, they all had a huge reckoning in the decade where they were all exposed as hypocrites.
Right, yeah.
For one reason or another. And I have to think that participated in some way in the fall of the panic. And by 90, I think we've talked about it before, the McMartin case was over, the heavy metal suicide cases were over. They were starting to freak out about rap instead. And it kind of just drifted away.
Yeah.
And while school shootings had happened, I did not go to school in the 80s wondering if today was the day.
Right, yeah, no.
Not a thing that you thought about. As opposed to when I'm teaching high school, you think about it literally every day.
Yeah.
Whether you're passing through the security checkpoint or whether you have a lockdown drill or whether you every day you think about it.
Is it because I wonder if it's because, I mean, these get reported, but on a national level, we get to hear them more to raise awareness that we should have had before.
Yeah. The 80s, CNN had just started the 24-hour news cycle. At this point, it was CNN launched in 81, I think.
Yep.
And so then you're just starting to experiment with that, but not multiple networks and Twitter and all the ways that you get news.
Yeah. And so people telling you what's important, what's a cause, what's this, like it's almost overloaded how many causes there are that I should be for, keep up with, do something about. It can drive someone nuts, especially a teenager, like if they're on social media and stuff. Like who knows? The mind can only comprehend so much.
Right. So
there's another kid here, and this is a little bit bigger one. Stephen Loiacano, who is the son of Rosemary Loiacano, Western Regional Director of BAD. And according to his mother on KFYI radio in 1987, an occult recruiter used D&D to lure her son into the world of Satanism. After his death in 1982 of carbon monoxide poisoning, Rosemary said she found occult books, occult pornography, symbols from black masses, including altar cloths and candles hidden in her son's room. That's just the jackpot. He said that friends of his said he had engaged in rituals and animal sacrifices. As she searched his room and looked in drawers, she found his writings, which she describes as horrible. Ted Schwartz and Dwayne MP chronicle Stephen's case in their book Satanism. They withhold his name, but the age, location, method of death, and details supplied in publication statements by the family all clearly point to his identity. Throughout his journey through a maze of fantasy, isolation, and ultimate madness, they splice its selections from his diaries. While the entries are undated, they do seem consistent and are certainly reveal a youth feeling increasingly isolated as he stumbled through his teen years. The report, his introduction to DVD came when he was 14 years old. His introduction to the occult happened sometime after he had started playing the game. It says lonely, despite loving parents who would have reached out to him if he had expressed what was in his head, he began looking for ways to change. During one of the games, a friend called upon Satan as a way of winning. He asked for satanic powers, and he won the game. As a result, the authors say Stephen made a pact with the devil, promising him his own and 20 other souls within the next 30 years. In exchange, Stephen was to be given invisibility, the ability to shapeshift, to stop time, to fly, to levitate objects, and to cast hellfire. He began to browse occult bookshops without his parents' knowledge and began to read on mythology, fantasy, and the occult. Unlike Mrs. Loicano, the authors do not mention occult group involvement. They only mention one other friend as going to the bookstores to him, and no detail no ceremonies or sacrifices. The book goes on to say, in retrospect, his parents realized that they probably should have gotten more involved with their son, but they knew from their friends that all teenagers have a tendency to withdraw from their parents. And on the surface, he still seemed to enjoy family activities, camping, and church. Later, they note he gave no warning signs to his family, his friends, or his teachers other than his declining grades. What was important, the diary, his drawings, even ritual objects such as daggers he had purchased, were all so carefully hidden that even a prying mother would probably not have found them. He used hollowed out books for many of the treasures. His actions were furtive. His pact with Satan too personal for him to want anything to discover the truth. The suggestion that he had given his family no clues that something was wrong is contradicted by a quote from his sister in Newsweek in '85. The family knew something was wrong with him when he took down his Cheryl Ladd posters and replaced them with pictures of demons. The family has asserted throughout that Stephen killed himself because he could not resolve the conflict between his desire to shed blood for his love of and his love for his family. He was afraid that he would kill them and decided instead to kill himself. His suicide note, as reprinted in Satanism, only hints at that being his motive in the last paragraph, which says, "My death is one that have been avoided. I could have lived for a long time here with you, building the foundation for my future existence, but something went wrong. My senses began to sharpen rapidly, and to live became a discomfort. I was caught between the hatred for this world and the thirst for blood. My plight for evil became stagnant. The only instinct was to act and act fast, so ending my life. Stephen was clearly a disturbed boy, but did D&D cause his death? I tend to think not. D&D may have sparked an interest in the occult, but it did not kill him. In fact, nothing in bad or NCTV publications, the discussion with Rosemary Loicano, or the Book of Satanism suggests Stephen was anything more remarkable than a teenager who was consumed by isolation and depression." That was a long one, but
I got to say, there's always one, right?
Right.
I mean, for all of the cases that you go through and you kind of relentlessly point out, there's someone that's, it's even if someone is into the occult stuff, it still doesn't mean.
The occult, that's just separate things. Like you could be an occultist and play Dungeons and Dragons. You can play Dungeons and Dragons and not lead to the occult. Like,
right.
You could
to be both. Who really has the time? I mean,
right. You could play Chutes and Ladders and wind up in the occult. Like that kid could have been into, let's say he was into Dallas at the time, and the occultist knew that and used Dallas as a way to get him into the occult. Like, oh, we know who shot JR.
Well,
you want to know how to bring him back?
A couple of things suggest themselves from that story. It was number one, movies and whatnot really want you to believe that there's an easily accessible occult bookstore in every city,
right?
My favorite being in The Howling, when not only do they go there to get all the information, but they got silver bullets on deck,
right?
But
Rupert Giles doesn't have bookshops all over the nation. I'm sorry, like he just
right. Well, Buffy have decided to franchise, and but also if I were making a deal, the Cheryl Ladd posters would have stayed.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, Satan, but
that's too far, Satan.
It's a bridge too far.
Nope, Cheryl stays, man.
But and that's kind of funny. What year was that?
This is probably like early 80s, or
yeah, because Charlie's Angels ends in like 82, 83. And then Tanya Roberts is in Beastmaster. So it's almost like a contextually out of date.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's 82. October 82 is his death.
Okay, so right about, I guess she'd have still been on Charlie's Angels, but
it was in syndication,
Yeah. Well, I think it's funny sometimes when people talk about the fandom of others and like what posters would have been on their walls at a certain time. Especially when you watch the films and whatnot, that contextually a lot of them are wrong
Right.
for the year.
No,
And
of course. Yeah. Or like it's cool retroactively, but nobody had it then.
yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. The Thing poster in Stranger Things season 1.
Yep. That always, I was like,
Oh, also Stranger Things season 1, when Jonathan is talking to Will about the Smiths, and that's 1984. That was not released in the States at that point.
I think they've had some song cues too that have been off, but still an enjoyable show. Just I like it. Some things will take me out for a sec because I'm that nerd that's like, wait a minute.
Yeah. Well, I like The Wedding Singer, but that's one of those movies that pretends that all of the 80s happened at once.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, indeed. That one's super guilty of that, but I do love that movie.
Yeah.
But yeah, and like I guess what was it? They had some movies playing at that theater in season 3 of Stranger Things. I was like, really? That made it there? Okay. Hawkins, Indiana. I got Day of the Dead. Okay.
I do remember Day of the Dead did play in Terre Haute.
Okay. So, well, then it works.
There we had one theater, the Village, that would tend to show more of that stuff. I know Dawn of the Dead hardly played anywhere.
Yeah. Well, because it was unrated.
But it did play midnight shows at the Village for a while.
Okay.
And what maybe that's a 78 film, but I think this is like 80, 81 that it played midnight showings there. It would have been a post-release. So it would have been like a Rocky situation, like a Rocky Horror situation where you had the print of the movie and you could play it at midnight.
Okay. Okay. We just have it laying around. It's archive stuff. So the last person they name drop is Michael Dempsey, the 17-year-old son of retired Seattle policeman Patrick Dempsey. Not the same guy.
Hey, wait a minute.
Yep. So he is one of the authors of the bad publication about D&D. So sorry, McDreamy. NCCTV says of Michael's May 81 suicide that parents witnessed him summoning D&D demons only moments before killing himself. In a 85 release, Chicago Tribune clarifies that a bit, saying Michael shot himself in the head only hours after his parents discovered him in his room as he invoked demons from the game. And then Newsweek did a story and said, following an argument with his father, he shot himself to death. So Newsweek is like, nah, we're not into that. Rosemary Loicano in 87 said she had spoken with Patrick Dempsey and that the argument concerned Michael spending too much time programming D&D into a computer. So Bad has assumed that because the argument concerned the game, that this is the reason Michael killed himself. The idea that fighting with his father might have emotionally affected him and caused his suicide. Whatever the cause of the fight seems to have slipped away from importance. If he and his father had been arguing about sports or schoolwork, it's a safe bet that neither of those things would have been blamed for his death. Exactly. A lot of these, like, parents trying to take away something that a child is passionate about, it means a lot to them.
And then he manifested demons.
Yeah, but we witnessed his demons, and then like the woman finding like all the books, all the demons. One was hiding. There was this little tiki statue, and then this up there, and he had this under the wallpaper. There was black paint and messages, and the black light came on, and all this. And Satan came in and asked if I wanted a cookie. Like, come on, like it's the embellishment of this shit, and just making up. Like, how do you feel making this shit up? Like, do they just double down on stupid and buy into it and just like believe the lie? I guess, but like, man. They're just angry about their kids and they're really going after Dungeons and Dragons because maybe a lawsuit can come and they can be millionaires off the lawsuit.
Yeah. It's, I mean, it's tragic. It's legitimate.
It really is. I'm not poking fun at these people's deaths or the seriousness of them. I'm poking at the ridiculousness of the nature of the parents and the blame and not pointing at themselves.
Yeah. And you mentioned the one case, but we'll be talking about another case in another segment.
Mhm.
But every once in a while, you get the legit article. And you and I have talked about this both briefly on camera and off, but
Mhm.
Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker,
Right.
the ruthless serial killer, rapist, child molester. He's everything horrible. And he was obsessed with satanic stuff. And he also happened to listen to metal.
Yep.
But the fact that he was a serial killer and out of his goddamn mind is a much bigger thing
Right.
than AC/DC, that he had an AC/DC hat. But that guy, you could say, is maybe the legitimate article in as much as he believes that he's a satanic serial killer. But
Mhm.
that's one dude out of all of these other cases, be it suicide, murders, or everything. I think a lot of people would point to Dahmer as the worst of the worst, and he never professed any of that kind of stuff.
Right. Yeah.
He was just a sick, evil bastard. It was just the ties that people, we've said it earlier in this, people look for meaning. They look for patterns when patterns aren't there. And when they've made a decision, they hold on to it, whether evidence to the contrary or not. It's really hard. We see that now today with a lot of conspiracy stuff. I think when someone is in a thing, it's very hard to dissuade them or
Mhm.
show them otherwise.
Yeah.
That,
They're lost big time.
yeah.
Yeah.
And some of those people are just people with nothing better to do. These are parents that lost their kids, which makes them incredibly susceptible to suggestion.
Mhm.
Uh,
And going both, like, what happens, like, because 12 kids did this, you take a game away for 4 million people who seem to have no problem with it. And what if you take that away, it angers them and they'll go find something else that you're not going to like. Just like it goes the other way too. Like there are stupid people with bad opinions and awful information out there that I don't like, but if you take them away, we don't have world peace tomorrow. And
yeah.
those people aren't going to be like, oh yeah, you saved me. They're going to go find it somewhere else, which it probably more dangerous corners as well. Like it's a sad
Yeah.
state of affairs on both ends of the teeter totter, but
Yeah.
how it is.
There's a great scene in a movie that, I feel very conflicted about. Forrest Gump,
Yeah.
when Forrest decides to stop running
Mm-hmm.
and he's like, I think I'll go. I'm tired. I want to go home. And
Right.
all the people that have been following them get angry.
Right.
And they're like, what are we supposed to do now? Well,
Mm-hmm.
sorry.
Right. Yeah. Like you go home too. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. This they try to push with D&D that it's not just a game, it's behavior modification. That's what it's
Yeah.
different. That's its difference. But I mean, isn't Monopoly you're in the role of like a banker or a buyer or a sell? Like it's more
Well,
subtly there, but
that sort of thing has always been more socially acceptable in America.
mm-hmm.
The aspiration to be rich
Right.
is okay.
Well, there's gold coins and shit in Dungeons and Dragons. There's currency.
Right, but it's the same. It's sort of the same thing as in the American educational system. It's okay to want to be an athlete. It's not okay to want to be in theater.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's
okay. It's cool to play fantasy football, but playing Dungeons and Dragons, nerd.
Yeah. Is there a nerdier pursuit than fantasy sports that requires the day-to-day tracking of stats and the maneuvering of players in a obsessive fashion?
Yeah. Look at that dork dressed in a Starfleet uniform, he says, laughing in his Dan Marino jersey.
That's right.
Like,
you're painted half orange, half blue. And I'm a sports fan, and I just the irony does not escape me that
Yeah, I enjoy sports as well. Like, but I've found like the movie people like will distance like, oh, you like a sport, like try to make you feel bad about that. Like, dude, don't play that game. You're being them again. Like it's not how it works. Like I can enjoy a athletic competition. It's okay. Like it's a dork thing. Like I'll call it a dweeby thing as well. Like it's yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's here. I'll interject a personal experience with when I was in 5th grade. So this is 83, 84. We were playing D&D on some lunches, and one of the it was a AT class, like a one of those gifted program kind of things. But so we had a program coordinator. The only reason I need to mention it is to establish the program coordinator comes in.
Okay.
And she comes into the classroom one day on one of her visits, and she sees Matt Sherwood's stack of rule books and shit on top of the little remember those module coat closets that had wheels on them.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's like his stack of stuff is up there for the stuff didn't come out unless it was recess or like a free time. Otherwise it would stayed up there. But when she saw it, man, she flipped out. And it was like we couldn't have those here, and we couldn't play, and there's all kinds of reasons that people get obsessed with it and everything. And everyone's like, what are you talking about? Like, they're sitting there.
Right.
It's literally a stack of books. It was like the stack of books was radiating evil or whatnot. It was weird. It was weird to witness. It was weird to witness as like, 10, 11-year-old to sit there and like, what are you on about? That whole kind of thing. But we couldn't do it. It got yanked.
Yeah.
So, you'd think ostensibly it'd be like a very harmless thing to do during, it's funny because you had to go outside for recess unless it was raining. So like we'd set up in a corner, like in the shade by the doors,
right.
It'd be like guys sitting around like their character sheets and dice and shit, It's like more unobtrusive activity you cannot imagine. None of us were going to break our arm on the monkey bars. But then
that's funny.
But we got busted. So yeah, but that was in the throes of this and Mazes and Monsters era and everything. And
damn.
But I remember people like in middle school and so forth, people bringing their books when when TSR really rapidly expanded the books that they had out, like the Grimoire and the Oriental Adventures book and things like that. Those were drifting around school pretty regular, like when I was in junior high and high school. And nobody ever said anything about the novels.
No.
Like the Dragonlance or the Salvatore books or anything. Nobody said anything about that. Like books were books.
The Dragonlance Chronicles. I read the first couple of those. Remember those? I was like, those would make good movies too, man. Lord of the Rings stuff. So to kind of get through this report, this thing, you can find it. You can find it on YouTube. It's 14 minutes. Granted, we have talked for like an hour and 15 about it, but everybody here that is the cause of a D&D violence is dead. There's no living people to have a person like who attacked people or killed people and is behind bars saying, yeah, D&D was the reason I did it. They're all dead. So it's everybody making up what they think is the reason for it. It's all dead people. There's no living, there's no survivors. It's all speaking for the dead. They're not speaking for any living people. There's nobody to defend themselves or shed light on anything. And much of it seems to hint towards kids upset at parents and peers for making them feel like outcasts, like, or having that passionate thing taken away from them or causing family rifts more than it is Dungeons and Dragons. That's what I take away from this, looking at it in 2022 back at 1985.
Yeah, and I look at it and it taken together, which we'll probably get to the Geraldo special at some point
We will.
in the series. But when you take all those things together, what a failure of TV journalism to advocate on behalf of the kids across the board. Not once did they consider. I recently watched the 2020 report with Diane Sawyer, like the update of a case from a few years ago where the kids had been in captivity to their parents for many years, and they were all emaciated and their vocabulary was undeveloped and everything. And they finally one night snuck one of the girls out. She flagged down a police car with a cell phone that they'd obtained, and she'd taken pictures of her siblings chained to the beds and whatnot. They went in, and throughout that story, I felt like so much sympathy was there for the kids, and just really it was advocacy journalism. It's like, look at the terrible things that happened to these kids. Look at what happened, and look at how the system screwed them after they escaped. The parents went to jail and everything, but all this aid and everything they were promised never came through. And all that. But it made me think about the context of the stuff that we're doing. Like, man, nobody was taking up for the kids. And
they showed them playing the game and make them look like idiots, like or just they don't know what's happening to them or something. Like it's in a place of pity or a place of like thinking they're crying for help. But there's no pro Dungeons and Dragons in this report at all. Like it is compassionate to these accusers, and they're the ones like raging and everything like that. And the Dungeons and Dragons guys are like, you are wasting our fucking time. Like that's what they're kind of like. And they go hard at them. They don't go hard at the parents at all. They're like, granted, they have children that are dead, but they should ask, like, were there other things? Like what, And as we see history has unfolded, there was other things. There was stuff they weren't telling people. There was stuff they clipped out of reports or didn't care to mention then,
Yeah, and I believe it was Robert Plant. Both Robert Plant and Ozzy have different takes on the same quote. Like, if you're an entertainer, whether you're making games or you're making music or whatnot, you don't design something that makes your fans kill themselves.
Right.
Plant specifically said, if we were going to put something backwards on one of our records, it would have been buy more records.
Right.
You wanted you wanted them to buy your shit.
Yeah.
You don't want your fans to kill themselves.
Unless you're serving the Dark Lord. You're serving him. Like that.
Well, they did a poor job of it because it was like a dozen out of 4 million. So
got 12 souls better than none, right? Like no. But yeah, so that was this report that it's insane to watch. Go back, watch. It's 14 minutes of your time. And it's just crazy to see a news story like this that has just extremely dated itself and looks outright irresponsible. That's what it looks like. And this was a pretty deep and personal episode here going on. I really enjoyed going over this with you, Troy. And that'll do it for this segment of Products of the Panic. Troy, loving doing this. This is good. We've had technically 3, but 2 so far. But look forward to the next one. Where can people find and keep up with you in the meantime?
I am a staff writer for the Saturday Evening Post. Yes, the historic 200 years old Saturday Evening Post, which can be found at SaturdayEveningPost.com. And you can find me at Troy Brownfield on Twitter, among other places.
All right. And I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Brandon4KUHD, written work at WhySoBlue.com. There is more from the Brandon Peters Show this very week. But until then, hail Satan.
Thank you for listening. The Brandon Peters Show is a Creative Zombie Studios production. Produced by Brad Shoemaker and Brandon Peters. Written and edited by Brandon Peters. Announcer vocals by Jessica Alsman. Theme song by Metavari. Web design and show art by Brad Shoemaker with Brandon Peters. All music and clips featured in the episode are property of their respective studios, and no infringement is intended. Additional information on this and other episodes at brandonpetershow.com. For any inquiries, press opportunities, or sponsorship, contact mail at brandonpetershow.com. The show is available on Apple Music, Spotify, or anywhere podcasts are found.